Hi, I'm Sam Atkinson. This is NSF's Compliance Unlocked. Today we're here on episode 4 with Mike Hidock. And last week we had Ian White and we were talking to him about inspections. And today we're talking about inspection remediation. So, Mike, great to see you.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us today. We're really excited about hearing all that you have to say. And as I said, last week we had Ian White with us. Ian actually gave us a question for you. This is a feature we've actually introduced on our podcast where the speaker who's with us today will ask a question for the next speaker. So if you don't mind, and you can humour me, your question is, have you ever disagreed with an inspector or seen a disagreement? And if so, what happened?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So before I even answer the question, just to give you a little background of myself and my experiences. So it's not just working with clients through regulatory inspections, but I've also hosted a number of worldwide agencies. We're talking FDA, EMA, MHRA, TGA, all the way down. I mean, everyone you can think of. So it was either hosting, co-hosting, or again, helping clients through these tough inspections. So happen to bear witness to what I'd call the beginning of the end, right? So it was a very high-profile pharmaceutical manufacturer. And I was co-hosting this audit, particularly with the FDA. And there was a fundamental scientific disagreement, right? So across the table from quality to the inspectors, it was more about, well, you put in an in-process test that wasn't required for your finished products. But you would fail the in-process test, but you would then later pass your finished product, but you'd still release your product without properly investigating root cause for in-process. So this went in a lot of different ways through a fundamental scientific disagreement with the agency. But the VP of quality was nowhere to be found during these discussions at all during the whole inspection. And about day 3 or 4, because the FDA said, well, we'd like to hear his take on it, he comes down, kicks the door open, walks up to the inspection table, slams his fist on the table, and starts to yell what his point of view is, and looks up at them, and they said, any questions? Then get the hell out of here. And he walks away, this stunned look on the agency's face, and they click their pen like, well, we're not going anywhere now. So that was what I'd call the bearing witness to how not to disagree with inspectors.
Absolutely. And I'm sure you'll have a lot to tell us on how to do it in the right way today, which is great. But these experiences, they're what you'd call perhaps character building, aren't they? Yeah. And, we often joke about them being character building, something that's not particularly enjoyable, but you do get something out of them, don't you, really?
Yeah, absolutely.
You can learn from these environments.
Sure. I mean, and we just have to realize that, the inspectors are there as they're not your enemy, but then again, they're really not your friend either. But, the character that you're building is that relationship and that trust, right? That trust factor. We'd like to think that everyone who's going through inspections has the right intentions, right? So it's everyone who's not trying to defraud consumers by bad practice intentionally, not trying to lie. So the advice that I'm giving or the talks that we're about to discuss are more aimed at people who are companies that are trying to do the right thing, who are trying to improve their quality culture, and that through the audit process itself, like you said, it builds character.
Yeah, it definitely does. It definitely does. And, we are talking about inspection remediation and bad inspections today, aren't we? And you're describing a sort of situation which a lot of people have to cope with all of the time. But what would you sort of describe as, what is a bad inspection? What constitutes that?
Well, there's a number of factors that constitute bad inspections, right? So when you think about bad inspections, think about a variety of different ways things could go wrong from the get-go. So that's being number one, inspection ready. And companies always fail to be ready as soon as an agency walks in that door. When they're caught with your pants down, is right?
Absolutely.
Adage, right? The luck of the audit. It's things are going wrong on that day. Things are misplaced around the warehouse. Things are in chaos. It's always that day the agency would walk in. So have a protocol in mind. So you're always ready for line of sight. So inspectors always have a pathway to go when they're taking their tour, right? The backroom is a huge thing. Documentation flow into the inspection. When an inspector requests documentation, make sure it's been reviewed properly. Make sure people that are subject matter experts speaking to it are in the know, and they don't misspeak, right? To the point where it looks not truthful, or it looks that the subject matter expert really doesn't know their material. There's a lot in the communication aspects. All these things could bode very unfortunate in the start of an inspection, which could turn the inspection right on its ear. So, right up front, you have to, again, audit ready, line of sight, documentation.
Yeah, and we'll come on to talking about that in a bit more. But obviously, when there are bad inspections, it's awkward for the organisation. It's difficult. It's difficult for those involved, and it can be financially kind of quite devastating for some. But there's a bigger picture, isn't there? I mean, what else is there? I mean, in terms of that impact of that poor inspection.
Well, I think some of the during the course of inspection, when the company's starting to find out it's going the wrong way, right? It's sort of a bloodbath mentality. It's almost like a why bother.
That's a different description.
People are going in, it feels like an executioner. You're being led into the execution room, and it sort of sets that mindset for the company as more the why bother. But the longer lasting impacts is the fallout. So what would happen if that company continued that trajectory of that bad inspection? They got a warning letter, right? And that's. We call it the kiss of death in the industry, but it really doesn't have to be. If again we talk about culture, we talk about the quality mindset, quality culture. We can get through this at the end. So it doesn't have to be a kiss of death, but a bad inspection could yield a warning letter, which can send a company down a path of ultimately failure.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's bad for the company, but obviously the supply of that product as well can be, if that's removed, it can potentially be a really big problem, especially if there are limited alternates. But, I mean, you talk there a bit about culture and that element of it. I've talked to a number of other guests actually about culture and the impact of that. Be interesting just to hear your thoughts on how important that is, or what people should be doing in order to get themselves in the right position from a cultural perspective.
Sure. Yeah. So culture is something that is something you really can't measure, right? I mean, it's I guess you can in certain ways, but culture just has to be there. It has to be like I guess my father used to say, it's what you're doing when somebody's not watching, right? So it's doing the right thing, and you really have to feel that within your organization, and that comes from leadership. So it's a leadership-driven initiative, to drive culture. And you can see that during, like an inspection, when people are speaking with the agency or whatever regulatory body they're speaking with, if they're coming from a place of fear, almost like I had to make this decision based on business, then that's not a sound quality culture. You want to hear that proper investigation root cause was performed to a high level, and the employees who are speaking to it are confident in that, and that embodies and shows that there is a strong quality culture. There's a commitment to finding root cause and producing safe product, not from a price perspective.
Yeah, which so often can be the way, and certainly what's perceived anyway within an organisation. And I think the other thing you touched on there was leadership, which I think is important. Leadership and communication. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, so with leadership communication, it's key that the organization prides itself on quality. It doesn't matter who it's coming from, if it's the QC department, if it's your QA department, production, everyone has to wear the quality hat, no matter what, where they sit in the organization, no matter what position they have. And again, that's a leadership-driven initiative. If they're going through a period of, responding to an agency, right, through remediation, it's important that you get a feel from leadership that there's trust to build on that quality culture. So you would respond in a way to say, we take this seriously as an organization. We had a bad inspection, we had some fallout, but as a leadership, we take this. We pride ourselves on quality culture. We've made some determinations in light of quality, whether that's right people, right roles, however they want to address it. But that has to be out in front from leadership.
And inspectors tend to look for that, don't they? They look at the leaders and the leaders of the organisation and the impact they're having on the quality of the whole organisation, really, that whole quality management system. And that's a key part of really an organisation demonstrating they've got that level of control and that quality function in place to deliver the compliance that the inspectors are looking for.
I've actually seen a conversation, I think this was a MHRA inspection, where the vice president of operations was having a dialogue and came across as being not quality minded or even mistruthful. But I think it was more about a lack of understanding, and I don't think he was trying to purposely mislead or
One would hope
misguide.
not.
But I'll never forget this gentleman's son was actually in the room as a junior manager, and the inspector says, "Yeah, I don't want to speak to that person anymore. The VP, you're cut off."
Really?
I find you're being very mistruthful. From here on out, I want to hear it from you. The young man over here, he seems truthful and honest.
I mean, it doesn't surprise me. I mean, I think that's the key, isn't it? I mean, inspectors, I've been an inspector before, and it is what people want to see. They want to see there is an honest and transparent relationship with that organisation and the leadership. So, I mean, I say it doesn't surprise me. It's slightly shocking, but I can understand it. It makes sense. But quite an interesting example. Yeah. Have you got any other stories up your sleeve in terms of interesting inspections while we're on the subject?
Boy, I've got plenty, but I would say that one thing that I've learned is communication is key, right? So it is a dialogue with human beings. You have to understand that, and I don't think that you can come out of that audit mode. I think you have to stay basically in that mode and realize that sometimes what you say, you feel like this personal connection, you may offer a little too much, right? So I was having a dialogue with an inspector who happened to share that he writes comic books, and I felt it appropriate to say, well, what kind of comic book? What character? We kind of went down that road. So. And he wouldn't tell me. He says, "This was personal." I said, "Oh, okay." I said, "What is it, warning letter man?"
Oh, no.
And unfortunately, we got a warning letter. So I don't think it was because of my joke. But again, it just shows that you always have to be more, focused on the business at hand and not get too caught up in some of the personal dialogue.
Too tied in, yeah. And obviously you need to set a particular tone for that kind of environment. I mean, how do you go about doing that to make sure you've got that right tone? So it doesn't turn into a bit of a disaster. Yeah.
I mean, it's, again, I was just giving you an example of being a little overly, personable, but, being personable and friendly, keeping a very positive demeanor. Going back to the example I gave with banging your fist on a desk. I mean, that's obviously the most extreme of what not to do. But I think having a very positive dialogue, being, again, polite, and working as a team with your inspectors help to build that successful outcome.
Yeah, I think that is critical. I mean, just ensuring you're reactive and responsive to what the inspector's asking for as well during that whole process. But of course, things can go wrong. And, you can end up with perhaps the outcome you're not expecting.
Yeah.
So what would you recommend in those circumstances when that happens, when the worst happens, the one thing you really fear?
Well, there's many things that I'm sure you've seen in your experience that go wrong during audits. But when you're really sitting dead rights on an observation, there's really the inspector's building a case towards making an observation or a series of observations, and that's happening. I think it's key to be very proactive in your approach to say, what, I want to say that I acknowledge this as a deficiency, and we are going to start our remediation right away. This is what we're going to do. Or if you think that the observation that's the case to make the observation is not correctly warranted, you can always revisit that with the inspector and say, you know what, you've touched on this and I failed to provide some good evidence to support our position, and this is what we have. Would you please, review this and reassess, right?
Yeah, but carefully.
So.
Approaching the inspector carefully. I think it can be pushed too far in that circumstance if the inspector thinks that they have a clear view. But you're absolutely right. There's nothing wrong, is there, about really saying, well, look, or if you don't understand, I think is the other point that I always think it's really important that organisations ask the inspector, where does this deficiency come from? Why is it a deficiency? Because being able to rectify it properly really comes from understanding it in the first place.
Correct. So. Absolutely. And if you're able to build yourself a really nice corrective action plan during the inspection and share that, doesn't look forced, doesn't look like somebody did it in the back room. I mean, you actually put thought into it. You'll get credit for that. I think people, the agencies will understand that you're trying to do the right thing, and they'll take credit for that in everything else they look at going forward.
Yeah.
They know you're proactive. They know you are ready to transform, right, to remediate some of the things that are bad practice.
Yeah.
And if you show that during the inspection, I think that would help.
And you really touch on something quite critical there, which is the timing of responses. And there is a right and a wrong time in some respects.
Yeah.
Because if you try and fix something too quickly, then of course the inspector might not think you've really thought about it. But if you take too long, then the inspector might think that you're not necessarily putting in the level of commitment that's needed. So how do they judge, what is the right time?
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point. I think timing is very critical in how you convey timing to corrective actions and remediation. So I think when you're putting something in writing to the agency, agencies, whomever it is, you don't want to give yourself a short rope, right? You want to give yourself the appropriate amount of time to make sure that task is going to get completed and effectiveness is checked and verified. By failing to do that, companies, I call it, chase their tail, because they'll give a short timeline. They'll communicate to the agency that we're going to hit these timelines. Then they want to go ahead and give updates, written updates to the agencies to say, this is our progress. But if you don't give yourself enough time, you're going to keep tripping over that, right? You're going to say, well, guess what? We failed to meet this timeline, and here's why. And then here's the new date. And it's short again. Guess what? You're going to miss that timeline. Now your focus is on communicating about why you've missed due dates instead of focusing on the remediation task. So I always tell companies that I work with, make sure you give enough room and enough time to deliver a very good, sound corrective action that can be verified.
And that brings us really nicely onto, how do you set up a really good CAPA plan, the corrective action and preventative action that's needed. How do you do that to make sure it's adequate and it's going to really meet the needs of what the inspector's looking for?
Absolutely. Good question, right? So we have to just focus on, companies always are short-sighted, and they think that what was found in this particular example is the end of the story. But they have to tell the story in a way that says that we are not just looking at what was found, because in an audit, it's just a snapshot. So we want to be holistic. We want to look at everything that could be impacted from this departure from procedure or this area of improvement. We want to make sure we focus everywhere that this could be impactful in the organization. So you cast a wide net and you plan for that. Never just look at the individual siting itself. Always beyond that. What else can it be impactful in our organization? How else can it impact product?
And that sometimes, right, can go as far as different sites within the same organisation, can't it? Or even different departments. So
Absolutely.
Not just looking at how it's impacting that sort of the broader department, but between.
Yeah. For example, if you have an ingredient that was impactful in a product, right, and that product didn't pass test standards because of the nature of this particular ingredient, well, what else is out there with that ingredient? If it's a common use ingredient, then what else can potentially be impacted? And then you cast your net for everything else.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And let's face it. Sometimes we do end up with deficiencies that are perhaps not quite what you expect and not what you hope for. But I did hear a little bird told me that you were suddenly involved in a particular finding that you weren't expecting. Perhaps you can tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so it's going back to being prepared and thinking that everything is in play during an inspection. So that includes yourself and what's on yourself. So you're touring around with a European agency, and it escapes me exactly which agency, but I offered my lab coat to go into a CNC area. The inspector took my lab coat and happened to dig in my pocket, and there was a smoking cessation device. Before the days of vaping, for if you wanted to quit smoking, they gave you this little device that was nicotine. And she was very like, what is this? I said, well, that's my inhaler for, and she made a big ruckus about it. I was trying to back and well, that's my personal lab coat, and that's, she's like, oh, you have medicine in here? Like, and I basically they made an observation out of me. So not the way I wanted to make the report. So,
absolutely not, but a really interesting sort of way in which people need to be aware of everything that's on them, as you say. But it's you learn lessons. That's what I said at the start. Character building.
That's right.
So, one final thought. Obviously, as we go through and we're trying to improve through our CAPA programs, it does link into things like the quality, maturity of an organisation, doesn't it? So, is there something that organisations should be thinking about, as you say, more holistically when they're looking at their CAPA programs?
Yeah, I think, CAPA is one piece of the pie. I think when you're talking quality culture, and it's a difficult sometimes conversation to have with an organization. So they have to really look at who's on the team and look at right people, right roles, right leadership. making sure that quality extends through every facet of the organization, and make sure they have the right people for it. Does that mean hiring more people? No, it means hiring the right people. It means hiring good people with quality minds to help build that leadership team.
So I think that brings us to a really nice close at that point. Thank you, Mike. It's been great to have you on. And of course, as we're doing with all of our podcasts, we're providing a question to our next speaker, who is Marie O'Callaghan. And she's going to talk to us a bit about being a QP and the whole world of QPs. Do you have a particular question for her that you could share with us?
Yeah, it's being a QP has always been fascinating to me, and I just always wonder, in terms of, one thing I didn't cover a lot of is the risk management approach, and I just would really like to find out from her is, how QPs are responsible for risk management, especially with organizations that maybe they're doing batch release for, right? So talk about some of the principles of risk management.
Sounds excellent. I'm very much looking forward to that, and hope you'll all be able to join us for our next podcast with Marie. But thanks once again to Mike and for you for joining us. This is Sam Atkinson, and this is NSF's Compliance Unlocked.